is potentially an echo of previous deity figures like Osiris, who was killed, resurrected, and those baptized into his death and resurrection, they get saved in the afterlife. Romulus and Perseus, they were miraculously born of a virgin. Zalmoxis, his death and resurrection assured followers that they would live forever. The Sumerian goddess Inanna, executed by a hostile court in an underworld, her corpse was crucified, rose from the dead, ascended, and now reigns from heaven. Does that sound familiar?
Although this gentleman was on point, he does expose himself to a few things that were he can be criticized on, and that's fine. Nobody's going to be perfect, and we are oftentimes may get a few facts here and there incorrect. He's right about Osiris being executed, but then being resurrected for only a short period of time, long enough for a miraculous birth of the child Horus could be performed. But there is nothing in the Osirian mythologies that suggests or says that you are baptized into his name. You're not baptized into the name of Osiris. But it is true that according to their mythos, you go into the field of reeds if your heart is lighter than the feather of Mayat. It is true that if your heart is heavier than the feather of Mayat, that Horus may come and advocate for you, and then Anubis and the 13 judges will then determine whether or not you will enter into the field of reeds and live into a heavenly place with the underworld heaven god Osiris. And their heaven was under the earth, but it was still a heaven. The Inanna story, she does reign in heaven, but she wasn't crucified or convicted by a court. There was a sort of gathering, but that gathering wasn't so much about her being convicted. That gathering was about her being down in the underworld, and that gathering was about her husband Dumuzi being unjustifiably murdered and then her inheriting a kingdom of her own. So a little bit off, but then these stories, the Kemetic story and the Sumerian story, have been told for 4,000 years before they were upended, and then they were told by different people at different times who had different political agendas. So you're going to have variations of these mythos, which is why they're all mythos, in the same way that you have varying stories and teachings concerning Jesus and anybody else. But what he is demonstrating is that there was a certain archetype that was utilized back in the day to create legends about certain people who were Messiah types, whether we're talking about Dionysus or Attitus or Romulus or anyone else of that nature. You know, here is Zeus, the main god, who comes down and have spiritual, physical sex with the mothers of Perseus and the mother of Hercules or Heracles and the mother of Achilles, and they produce this child who is a demigod, who has these powers and wonderments that are beyond the known thought process of man, to the level of the Nephilims and things of these natures. So that is a popular archetype, and for these people to have miraculous birth, whether it is Isis hovering over a phallic symbol of Osiris because she couldn't find his ping, and she just hovered over it as a hawk, and in some versions she's a hawk, in other versions she's herself, hover over it, and then becomes miraculously pregnant without having sex. So there are these archetypes that are being taught, that was being taught and favored back in those times. So when the Jesus story is being written, of course it takes on some of those archetypes, because what people at that time frame would have been able to say is, your Jesus was a regular human who was born by human parents of Joseph and Mary, whereas Horus was born miraculously, after his dad was resurrected and she hovered above, or Zeus came in and made passionate spiritual love to Hercules' mother, and so that's why he's better, he's stronger, he's closer to God kind of sensibilities. And so those stories would defeat the Jesus story. So of course, with the Jesus story, you had to give him the miraculous birth. So the archetype was already there long beforehand, and it's just utilizing that same motif in order to validate your deity. And that's all it is. And that's why there's nothing special about Jesus. And I know people are going to say, well, Jesus is the only one who died for our sins. Does the process matter? There are processes to get into the comedic heaven by knowing the right spells and knowing the right things to say, and living a life where you do not break the 42 confessions of Mayat, which gets you into heaven. So you still get into heaven. When you look at the Islamic tradition, if you follow the laws and everything, you can still get into heaven. So Jesus dying as a human sacrifice isn't special. It doesn't make it greater. It's just a different process to get to the same place. And that's it. So always remember, you have to think logically through these processes, logically through these religions and these mythos, in order for you to come out with a clearer, fuller understanding through your critical thinking. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.